Okay, that makes our starting time. So I'm going to go ahead and begin the webinar. First of all, I always like to thank everyone for just joining in. It always means a lot to us that you guys are interested in learning more about Knowify and kind of what we do. And this is going to be one of the installments in our Pro Series webinars where we're really taking deeper dives into more specific parts of Knowify instead of doing these broad demonstrations that we usually will give. We're really going to take a specific piece of Knowify that people often have questions on and give as much information on that as possible. And today's topic is subcontractor management. And I know a lot of the people who use Knowify actually are subcontractors. So, just so I can clarify, what we're going to be covering is how to track subcontractors that you're hiring to help you with your jobs. Um, we see that it's mainly popular in general contractors using Knowify, but a lot of subs even have to hire their own subs. And so there's a lot of moving pieces. And I'd just like to make sure that you guys can see how all of these costs can be tracked in your system. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Terrin Kalian. I run our customer experience team at Knowify. I've been working with Knowify for about 5 years now. And basically, my role is to help people with any part of Knowify that they need to learn more about. All of the customer facing side of Knowify really is going to run through me at some point. So there's a good chance we've spoken in the past. And if you ever have questions, I'm always happy to answer them for you. And just to give you a quick little overview of what we're going to be covering with subcontractor management today, the first thing we're going to be discussing is uh, how to mark one of your vendors from your database as a subcontractor so that all of their expenses are automatically logged as subcontractor cost, regardless of how you enter them. I'll also be covering how to track a actual subcontract in Knowify. See the total amount in the contract, be able to track bills against that total contract value, and then see outstanding balances, manage change orders, things like that as well. I'll also briefly cover how to work with 1099 vendors. It's not quite the same thing as managing subcontractors, but it's always, kind of discussed at the same time. So I just want to make sure that you guys learn a little bit more about how that works. And then at the end, we will be going through a Q&A. I do request that you enter any questions into the Q&A portion of this Zoom webinar. I'll be covering anything that you submit during the webinar at the end, and you can also submit them at the end if there's something that I didn't cover that you wanted to learn more about. I know that Zoom also has a chat. Please enter all of your questions into the Q&A. It just makes it a little bit more organized and easier for me to get to them. And again, we will be going through that once I go through the demonstration portion of this webinar. And without much further ado, I'm going to go ahead and open up my Knowify account and teach you a little bit more about how we're going to be tracking these different types of subcontractor expenses. And what I'm going to do is start with the easiest version of this. If you have tuned into other webinars, if you've used Knowify a lot in the past, you know that if you enter something with in your purchases module, or if you enter something in your bills module, uh, these are all vendor expenses that almost always by default will show up as material cost on the job. What I want to learn is how to set up a subcontractor budget on a project, how to track subcontractor expenses as well. And again, one of the simplest ways to do this is to go into your vendor database. I'm going to go ahead and add a new vendor to my account. Uh, we can plug in any kind of additional standard information as far as tracking vendors goes. But you'll see that there's this option that says is a subcontractor. Now, once I do this, every time I add a expense under this vendor, Kate, it's going to automatically show up as a subcontractor expense in my job cost reporting on jobs. I'm actually going to turn Kate into a company here. And so once I add this, I'll be able to just log any expense like I normally would. You'll enter a bill, enter a purchase, whether if it's a cash expense or a uh, you know, purchase order where I'm going to log a bill later on. If it's a credit card expense, it can all be entered. And as long as, Kate's Electrical Contractors is the vendor, it's going to show up in this subcontractor cost to date. I'll use this job 1758 as my example here. And just so you can see how simple this can be, let's say I just received a bill. I'll say new bill. I believe I said 1758. I'll just choose anything, doesn't really matter. I can say electrical work. And she just sent a bill for $1,000. Now, if you're familiar with material costing in Knowify, you can see that I didn't really do anything different when it comes to my bill entry here. The only difference is that I chose a vendor that I had marked as a subcontractor in my vendors database. And now if I go back to this job, you can see that the subcontractor cost has increased instead of the material cost. And so that's a really big benefit of having that option, is that it keeps the process of tracking a subcontract a little bit simpler in Knowify, where I just tell Knowify ahead of time all of these expenses will be sub, and they react accordingly in my job costing. But another thing I'd like to note here is that if once the vendor is marked as a subcontractor in Knowify, I don't need to manage this through bills any longer. I can actually just have a simpler transaction where I could just say purchases, new purchase, uh, paid with cash, and anything now, again, with Kate's contracting, is automatically going to log as subcontractor expense. So this is a little bit easier for situations where, let's say, you don't have quite as formal of a relationship with your sub and they're not signing a contract with you. You just know that you write them a check as their work's completed. You can enter in these cash or debit transactions and it still updates your job cost to date to show you where you stand with your subcontractors. But what I want to get into next is the process of actually tracking a formal subcontract in Knowify. And what I'll do is I'll add a new job really quickly so you can see what this process is going to look like. And when I'm in my plan and track section and I add my job phase, I'll stick with electrical work here. You'll see that there's this button that says enable subs. When you click this, first it lets you plug in a budget. And at this point, all you're really entering is how much you expect to have to spend on a subcontractor. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to represent bills. It doesn't need to represent contract values that were sent to you. It's really just your way of saying, I think that this job is going to cost me $5,000 in subcontractor fees. I'm going to add another one here. I'll call this one flooring, and I'll get into a little bit more detail of how this could be tracked later on. But that's the idea, is that at this point in time, I just want to put into the plan how much I should be spending on subcontractors by the end of the job. For what it's worth, if you want to put in the subcontract during this budgeting stage of a job, you have that option by clicking add subcontractor, where I could say flooring. It'll pull up my vendor ABC Flooring. I could put in how much they quoted to me, $4,000. And here's another feature that I will be getting into a little bit later on, but this is where you can actually see the vendor's insurance or workman's comp liability. You can see all of that information stored here, and whether or not it's expired. I can see in this case I probably shouldn't be hiring ABC Flooring. This is a believe growth feature in our account that I'll be giving you more information on towards the end of this webinar. But now I have a contract in with ABC Flooring, and I'll be able to actually track how many bills, or how much has been billed out of that $4,000 contract value. What I'd also like to show you is that you don't need to put that in at this point in the time, because I can see that right now I have a budget for $9,000 for subs, but in electrical work I haven't selected a subcontractor yet. So if you want to set up your budget first, work with the client, and then once the client approves, that's when you communicate with the subcontractor. You have that option as well. So once this plan's live, I'm going to do that same thing. Subcontractor, this is going to be done by Kate's Electrical. And let's say that they did perfectly come in with a contract with a their bid that was at my budget. And if I'd like, I can actually upload their contract here as well, just so I have it on file if I ever need to reference it. Always a handy thing. Let's say they under over bill you. You can say, no, here's the contract. This is what we agreed upon. And what this is going to do is generate a purchase order in Knowify, a flexible spending purchase order more specifically. So you can log bills against that PO and see how much is remaining in the balance through the life of this subcontract. And because it's a PO, we do let you set the PO number and the PO date manually if you need to. But I'm going to go ahead and submit and let Knowify automate that for me. Now, this is showing me, Knowify's created PO 1851 to represent your subcontract with Kate's Electrical Contracting. Now, whenever I receive a bill from Kate, I can expand this phase of the job, and you see we have a button right here that shows Add Subcontractor Bill. What this is going to do is go through the process of bills, add new, and fill in the PO number. So all I have to do is plug in how much she's sent the bill for so far. Let's say it's a 40% signing bill. And when I submit this, just like any other bill, it's going to take that 20,000 out of the purchase order value, and it's going to update my job cost based off of what the category was, in this case subcontractor, and it's going to show me that I've now spent $2,000 on my subcontracts out of my $9,000 budget. And one thing I actually want to quickly backtrack on, because a lot of people often ask about, well, what if I want to email something to my subcontractor before we start the work? You can see that right next to my subcontractors, it says PO here. I have this little view PO icon. This is a way that I can actually check out the document that was created when we logged that subcontract into Knowify. And I have this option, email PO to subcontractor, and it's actually going to generate a work order document with the description of work here. We can include additional information about what they should be doing. It's telling them how much we're going to be doing this for, or we expect them to do this work for. But I also can hide prices if they're going to come back with a quote. Just a nice little option available in Knowify. And so I can email this request for work directly to the sub through Knowify and get a quote from them, and then update their contract value as we go through. It just gives us a little bit more functionality there. But now that I've gone through the process of entering a contract and entering a bill, I'd like to show a little bit more about how Knowify is going to be reporting on this current subcontract in my plan and track section. I can see that right now the contract value is $5,000. They've billed me $2,000, and I actually haven't recorded a payment on that bill yet, so it's showing me that we haven't actually paid everything yet. This is important, and it's kind of a quick way for me to see if I need to be logging payments, and it gives me a shortcut to get there. So I'm going to click this via subcontractor bill, record a payment, and I'll do a full payment. We also have the option of partial payment if we ever need to, but I'll say, $2,000 has been paid so far. And when I open up that project again, you'll see that it updates to show me a little bit more about where we stand with this subcontract in Knowify. But another common thing that will occur when we're managing subcontractors is that the change in scope, the scope of work may change. And I may need to pay this contractor more or less than originally agreed upon. That's why next to this add subcontractor bill in the dropdown, you have add change order as well, where I could say, Kate's actually going to need to bill me $1,000 more than originally agreed upon. And you can see that it increases the contract value. What this means is that now there's a greater outstanding balance. Out of the $6,000 that we agreed upon, they have billed $2,000, which means I should be able to log bills up to $4,000 against this contract. So if I click Add Subcontractor Bill again, I'll see that Knowify is automatically filling in, well, here's the remaining balance. And I could say, okay, well, they just sent another bill for the next $2,000. And it's just going to keep taking that out of my contract value to show me where I stand on this project. And I'll be able to see this nice detailed breakdown of on the electrical work. Kate has signed a $6,000 contract with me. She sent me $4,000 in bills, and I've paid $2,000 of those bills. And that's how we can really get this granular information on kind of where we stand, and not just how much the job has cost us, but why has it cost us that much to date. I'll get into 1099 tracking in a bit, but one thing that I did mention earlier that I would like to show a little bit more about is tracking, vendor documents. So let's say I have a vendor who I need to have their insurance just to make sure, their liability insurance, to make sure we're good to hire these people and we won't get in any trouble because they're insured. I can upload different documents directly into here and then set what type of document it is. Is it their license, general liability, workman's comp? Is it a W-9? Let's say it's their license, and this expires, at the end of the month. This helps me, so when I am entering a subcontract, as you saw earlier, it'll let me know if I shouldn't be hiring this person because something like their general liability insurance is now out of date. And then if I ever need more information about, where do we stand with all of our subcontractors, who do I need to ping to get more information, I can run this subcontractor report, which is going to give me a breakdown of all of our vendors and how much, and when all of their documents expire, what we have on file with each of the subcontractors. So this just helps give me a little bit more information on a high level in case I want to just do some due diligence, make sure that everyone's good to be hired when we start our next jobs. The last thing I'm going to do here, though, is get into our 1099 tracking. This is going to be the process of basically marking a vendor as a hourly vendor, someone that we don't pay on contract. We're not signing a contract with them, but we actually are going to track their hours and pay them based off of how much they've worked. So I'm going to have a new vendor in my account. And this one actually is going to be a person because I'm paying this individual, not a company. And again, I want to mark them as a subcontractor, but you'll see that it asks their role or trade. And it pulls up my different roles that are available in my user database. Those of you who tuned into our labor costing webinar will learn a little bit more about what the roles will do. I'm going to call this user a contractor, submit. And just so you can see what this is going to look like, this automatically enables that vendor as what Knowify calls a resource, which means I can now go to my admin section under my rates. And now, just like my employees or my users with no access to Knowify, I have the ability to set a rate. We pay Steve $40 an hour, and I'll be able to track time for this user. In this example, since I don't have my smartphone app up, I'm just going to show it as a user with no access where I enter their time. But just so you can see, you also have the option in the users section, and I believe this is another upgraded feature, but you can create a subcontractor with mobile access to Knowify, where I could say, we want to give Steve access to Knowify, and it'll invite him to log into the app and track his own time. So we can see how much he's costing the job, and then later on how much we should pay him for his work. But just so you can see a little bit more about this, if I go to my time tracker now and I say enter time, I have in my list of employees Steve, and I can add my new activity. He's working on 1760. Let's say he's doing the flooring, and I can enter time for him just like any other employee in my company. Now, what's going to happen differently here versus the other subcontractor costs we've been logging is that since he is an hourly worker, we're going to be seeing these as labor cost instead of subcontractor cost. This is just a general rule in Knowify. If it's hourly, we call it labor. And it still updates my total cost versus budget. It just isn't going to update that subcontractor cost. Again, it's not really truly the same type of subcontractor cost that we see throughout Knowify, but I do like to cover it at the same time because these 1099 workers are often referred to as subcontractors as well. And I'll be able to see, under flooring, Steve has spent 16 hours costing the company $640. That's really the basics of what I like to cover when it comes to subcontractor costing. I know this is a little bit more basic than a lot of the topics we've been getting into, but I always like to make sure that people are familiar with all of these different tools and options inside Knowify. And now I'll go ahead and get into my Q&A. I did see that a couple questions came in, so I'm going to try my best to get those answers out to you next. And it looks like the first question was, if we're using the same sub on multiple phases, what is the correct way to add them to a phase? So that's a very good question, because you can add the same sub under multiple phases if you need. So like I have Kate's Electrical Contracting set up for electrical work here. But I'm going to go ahead and switch this to budget mode so I can adjust my plan. And I can actually, under flooring, add subcontractor and again, add Kate's Electrical Contracting. I would say if they're all under one contract, I'd say it's probably best to just enter it as one phase so you can have one PO number, one contract. It might give you a little bit better of a workflow with them, but there's no limit to how many different phases a sub can be used on. And you can also add multiple subs per phase as necessary. So let's say the flooring phase of the job or your flooring budget has both a tile company and a hardwood company. You have that option of tracking two different subs under one phase or budget. And again, if you need everything under one PO, I would recommend doing it under one phase. That's going to be the easiest way to get that workflow. But that's, if you're okay with separating it and blocking one bill against multiple POs, then you can always separate into multiple phases. The next question was, in the invoice and PO module, when you upload a document such as a copy of the invoice, it stays with no issues until the actual data or PO data is modified. This is saying if you make a modification, you lose the PDF. To the best of my knowledge, that's not the case. If you're seeing something like that happen, definitely reach out to our support team. We should store those documents, indefinitely in your account. So reach out to our support team, support@knowify.com. If you're running into any issues with that, we're always happy to look into it. The next question was, can I enter a salary amount in the time tracker? So again, I mean, you have the option of, in your rates section, switching your 1099 people to a yearly salary. But by nature, 1099 workers likely aren't going to be paid annually. They're paid by the hour. So you may want to double check that that's actually the feature that you're looking for. If you would like to discuss that with our team, don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to help with that as well. It looks like that's all the questions that we had today. I do appreciate people joining in. I know this was a bit of a shorter webinar, but just wanted to make sure that you guys got all of this extra useful information. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at support@knowify.com. Next week, we will be covering change orders and QuickBooks integration for both QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop. Definitely recommend joining in. Thanks everyone else for taking the time, and have a nice rest of your day.